The information shared on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While we discuss topics related to mental health, well-being, and emotional support, we are not providing therapy or medical services. Always seek the advice of your physician, psychologist, psychiatrist, or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. If you are in crisis, feeling unsafe, or need immediate support, please contact a mental health professional or emergency services in your area. The views expressed by guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organizations or institutions.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A_Akai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. I like to say that my podcast looks to embrace salient topics related to mental wellness from a fresh and forward-thinking perspective, because, talking about mental health is not easy for a lot of people. So with that being said, if you are a first-time listener or viewer, welcome. I just always say, buckle up for safety, because it could be an unexpected bumpy ride, only because you may have a discovery today about something in your relationships, which is our topic, that you've never considered before. And of course, if you are a returning listener or viewer, well, welcome back. I always appreciate your support. You know how we get down here for the next 40, 50 minutes. Find that space, relax. I encourage people to grab a pencil and paper to jot down some thoughts that they may have through this, because I want you to be able to relax, listen, and reflect through this process and gather the things that you need. So we're going to keep on our journey, because we've been exploring roads less traveled in regards to improving your mental wellness. And it's not always an easy journey, but I hope at some point you're going to feel that it's worth it. And this episode today is just that. In fact, I think a lot of people are going to sit back and do some deep reflections about the relationships in their life, because I'm hoping to give you another tool to use. As you pull out your M.A.Y.A toolbox. I'm always giving you something to help you improve your emotional intelligence is the key thing to be able to use to evaluate relationships in your life that maybe you're questioning their value or what they do for you, or if you're doing too much. Well, hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll be able to dive deep into this and understand it more. Because what's interesting is this. Let's start the episode talking about this. We often treat almost every relationship in our lives as if they should last forever. Makes me think of Keith Sweat. Make it last, right? But what's interesting is when they don't, we often feel like we failed, or one more better than that, abandoned in those relationships. But we really need to step back, because what most people don't realize in some cases is maybe some of the people in your lives are not meant to be in that same space or in your space forever. So today we're going to break down 3 spaces that relationships can occupy, and they're all distinctively different and can have different purposes that you utilize them for, if you even realize they're there. These 3 types of relationships are transactional, transitional, and transformative. The 3 T's, as we refer to them. Now, as we have this conversation, let me just say something really quick. If you want to join the conversation, hopefully by now you can jump in at any point of time. If you're watching on Facebook or if you're watching on YouTube, all you have to do is just put something into the comment section, and then I can share it on screen and I can address your question you may have for me. So that's how you can be engaged. If that question, you have an aha moment and something pops in your head and you're like, because there's always those things that make you go, then you know what? Engage, put your question out there, and hopefully I'll have an answer for you. So that's how you can be engaged in the show. So let's kind of talk a bit more. And I'm actually going to be a bit more practical and give an exercise in this. I want everyone, if you're watching me on your phone, you can't do it, but we're going to kind of walk through it like it's real. Okay. I want for everyone to take their phone and I want you to look at either your call log or your text log, the people that are there in that particular space that you're communicating with. The first thing I want you to realize about that interaction that you're having is that those people that's either in your call log or your text log, and maybe not everybody, because it depends on if it's spam, then clearly we know these people don't mean much to you. They're harassing you in most cases. Bill collectors, we're not counting those people. But outside, I'm talking about people that when you see their number, you answer the phone call because you know it's them. When you see a text, you're responding. That's what I'm talking about in this particular exercise with your phone. The reason I want you to look at this and take a moment and reflect on it is because the people in that call or text log, these people could very well be shaping your focus. They could be impacting and influencing your energy that you're putting into things. But here's one better. They definitely can be a big part of how you are moving forward and living your life and embracing your future. Because people who move in spaces with you definitely impact your life on a very deep level. And many times we don't stop to consider it. We can often read the signs when something isn't right, but we don't often know what to do or how to evaluate the relationships. So why this matters, understanding who's in these text messages and in your call log, it matters because we can experience emotional burnout when we mistake transactional relationships and people in our lives as being transformative. Or we can experience heartbreak when we try to force a transitional person in our life to be that forever person, and they're not meant to be. And this is why assessing your relationships and understanding where a person might sit in those 3 T's for you. Is this a transactional relationship? Is this a transitional relationship? Or is this transformative? Makes a difference. And it's so important that you really understand their distinct differences, why they're important. Okay, so we've laid that down. Let's do a deeper dive and let's kind of break them down a bit more as we talk about this. Okay, so let's start with the one that most people probably don't think, honestly, that most of their relationships are transactional. Let me explain something. Almost every relationship that you embark upon, honestly, is transactional in some way. Transactional meaning give and take. But let's frame it out a bit more. And I'm going to say transactional. We're going to define it like this. It is that relationship is based on exchange, like I just said. It's functional. It's often convenient. And the purpose is a utility. It's a give and take and often no more. So some examples of transactional relationships. Honestly, you hear this all the time. Friends with benefits. Those are people who have actually set up a transactional relationship. They have no interest in commitment, but the transaction that they're seeking and they've agreed upon is intimacy. So that's a transactional relationship that you've probably heard people talk about and understand it. And some people are like, I'm not down with that. And some people like, this works for me. But that's a good example of a lot of times transactional relationships that people exist in. I'll give you another transactional relationship that almost all of us have experienced at some point in life, our jobs. We go to work to make money, to get a paycheck. Our employers hire us to do a job to pay us. That relationship is based on a give and take. It's transactional. I think at this point, you get a good idea what that means. So let's go into the next T, which is transitional. And this is one of those relationships, I'll be honest, that are probably harder to identify and often not frequently considered by people that they're in a situation that's transitional. So transitional, these relationships really like bridge a gap between who you are or where you are in your life right now and who you want to be or where you want to be. So they're a bridge. So a lot of times, maybe you've had these friendships with people and you thought they were fantastic. You felt connected and all of a sudden they end and they dissipate. Well, maybe those relationships were just honestly meant to be a transition for you to move to the next phase of your life. Because if they faded away at a time and you didn't notice until they didn't seem as present as before, ask your question, where did I start with those friendships and where am I now? Are they transitional? And a lot of people have had transitional relationships in their life and never realized it. In fact, there's a very cliche saying that you've probably heard a lot. People come into your life for a reason or a season. That is a good example, and it's well termed to say those relationships are transition because they served a purpose for you, but they're no longer present. And we often can struggle with transitional relationships ending because, as I said earlier in the show, we have this idea in our head that relationships are meant to last forever, and not every relationship is designed to be that way. And the final element of the 3 T's in relationship is transformative. And I'll say these are probably far and few between. And if you identify someone in your life that you would say has been transformative for you, I would tell you to thank that person. Because if you didn't realize it, hopefully you will realize it by the end of this episode. Those transformative relationships, they're very special and they often can be rare. Those connections often alter your path in life. So these could be examples of you come across a person who becomes a mentor for you and unexpected, and that might be the person who shapes what career path you go down. Or let's just say you had a difficult childhood and you didn't have good family dynamics, and perhaps you connected with someone who felt like family. And they help you to realize that because you didn't have a healthy family dynamic, it doesn't have to stunt your growth or determine how happy you're going to be. They transformed you because they challenged you. They changed you. Like they say, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And that would be a nugget that I would tell you when someone's transformative, that's what it looks like. So we've laid the foundation down to talk about what the 3 T's are. So they're transactional, perhaps. These are those types of relationships that could be in your life, like work. Transitional, they may be a friendship that no longer exists, but you did value the friendship, but that person doesn't have the same value or interaction with you anymore. Or transformative, you met someone like maybe a coach if you played sports that made you better, that made you grow. Those are those different relationship dynamics. And the question is, the relationships you're valuing in your life, because all relationships should not be valued the same. Hopefully you know that already. And there's, I guarantee you, a past episode that has unpacked that. But you need to make sure that you assign value to your relationships and determine where people may fit into this relationship space for you. Because the question turns into, go back to that episode about the economy of self. Remember, I have this theory I've created that says that ultimately you have limited resources mentally and emotionally. And how you choose to allocate them matters greatly. Because if you are allocating your limited emotional and mental resources, which also could be time and financial, into something, you're investing. The question is, does that relationship give you a return on investment? And if it doesn't, you have to ask yourself, then why are you assigning so much value to it if it gives you nothing back and it's depleting your mental and emotional reserves? Those are things you must protect. I would tell you to go back and check out that episode. If you go to YouTube, pretty much you can find it right there. Just look at all my episodes, and it's the economy of self. Of course, hopefully by now you've got that M.A.Y.A app, the M.A.Y.A experience, which you can find in Google Play. You can find it in the iTunes Apple Store, as well as you can find it in Amazon, and you can take me on the go. All the podcasts are there, as well as my blogs. Everything is there. That's M.A.Y.A, and you'll never have to wonder if you missed anything. Okay, so I'm going to refer you back to the episode, because if you don't assign value to your relationships, you may be all over the place with where you're allocating your resources, which often can explain maybe why you feel a lot of emotional and mental burnout, because you are running yourself ragged. Okay, let's do a little bit more of a breakdown, though. Let's do a deeper dive into talking about these 3 different spaces that relationships exist in. And remember, if you're having an aha moment and you get a question, feel free to ask. You can put something into the comment and chat sections, whether it's Facebook or YouTube. I'll read it, put it on the screen, and I'll respond back, and we can go from there. So if you have that aha moment, share, and let's see if we can navigate that space together. Okay, so let's jump into talking about those 3 T's in more detail. Let's start right from the top. The first one we started with, those transactional spaces, that I'm actually going to refer to those spaces as like a utility zone. Because transactional relationships, the reason I use the word utility is because they serve a very specific purpose. Now, let me say something about utility. Think of it this way. You ever heard the term, for all my sports fanatics out there, like a utility player? Often a utility player in sports is referred to a person that has a skill set and they contribute to the team, but they're not the person on the team that the team is either built around, or there may not be a starter. They're often a person who comes off the bench, but they have a purpose that serves something for the team. They do have value, but their value is not as high as the starter. So I know you young people out there had this little concept going about having your bench, which I kind of got to giggle out. But hey, you do what works for you. Because I guess if you look at it, who's on your bench, you assign the person who's your starter because they're showing up in a way that must matter to you or it does something. Versus, I'm assuming if you put somebody on the bench, they're not showing up like you want them to. Remember, we had a conversation a couple weeks ago about understanding how important that conditional relationships have a purpose, and you got to step away from the idea that everything is fairy tale and unconditional, because you set yourself up for failure when people don't meet conditions that you never discuss. What are conditions? They're pretty simple. They're what you need from somebody, it's what you expect from somebody, and it's what your boundaries are. And if you're not sharing those particular things with people in every relationship that you have, whether they be romantic, whether they be platonic, or whether they be familial, that might be a reason why you find you are frequently frustrated, overwhelmed, or disappointed, because no one can read your mind. And that's the first thing people need to learn. We teach people how to treat us and how to love us. And when they miss the buck, the question is it intentional on their part, or have we failed to make sure they understand what is it that we actually need, the conditions to exist in a healthy relationship? That's heavy right there. That's a whole nother episode. And it's also one of my articles you can read. If you got my app, the M.A.Y.A experience, you just go to the blog post, and right there, I write for Brains Magazine. There's a great article about unconditional love. Are you giving somebody a blank check? Yeah, there's a lot of shameless self-promotion, which I'm not good at, but I'm growing. Because if I want to help people, I got to tell you the resources that I'm trying to put out there for you. So there's that right there. So let's talk about that transitional space utility. Those people that it doesn't mean we don't like them. It doesn't mean we don't respect them. It could mean there could be some type of admiration. But the exchange you have with them is not concrete. It's not fixed. It's more of a give and take. So the core concept behind this, when we think about this, is, like I said, they're functional, they're surface level, but the key thing about transactional spaces is they're really about neutrality, reciprocity, and often convenience. So this is when people say things like, I'm not in a space where I want to be in a relationship, but I'm totally open to having friends with benefits. Real talk, folks. If that's not your cup of tea, don't sip. Okay? If you know you're not looking for a relationship that's purely transactional, because what that is, it's like saying, I want no commitment from you. I just want the intimacy with no strings attached. That means you understand that they've given you their conditions pretty straight out. And if you know that you cannot go along with that, don't agree. If you think you can, you make that choice. But the key thing about that, and this is where people often blur the lines and get lost in translation. They believe they can convince someone to change their mind. They believe that you say you just don't want to be in a relationship and you just want to be friends with benefits. But there are people who believe that they can change a person, that person may grow to love them. You are setting yourself up for failure because that person has given you a condition. Now, does it mean it can't happen? No. But you have to go with what they lead with. And they're being clear that they only want to have a transactional experience with you. So when people go into these types of situations, understanding they're transactional, but expecting more, do not be disappointed. Do not feel angry. And you did not fail, and you have not been abandoned, because that person was clear with you what their intent was. You made a decision based on different sets of guidelines that you created that were not agreed upon. So let's do a deeper dive so you clearly understand transactions and why these transactional spaces you should not agree to if you feel like you love hard and you love deep, especially in romantic relationships, or you need a higher level of commitment from something. Then don't agree to things that are transactional, because you're often going to probably have that emotional and mental frustration. So they are not inherently bad. Transactional relationships have purpose. And I think a lot of people don't agree, and often society will shame transactional behavior because we have in our minds that relationships are supposed to be long-term. Remember, I told you, everybody doesn't stick in your life. And be honest, a transactional space could end up being a transitional space at the same time. Interesting enough, you may be doubling up and don't even realize it. But often in society, we frown upon transitional relationships romantically, though most of the things we do in life are based on transactions. You go to a store, you purchase something, they give you a good, you pay for it. That's a transaction. You go to work, you do a job, they pay you. That's a transaction. So there are times when transactions make sense, but here's how you have to understand them. They're boundaried. So if someone tells you, I'm doing this with no strings attached, then make sure you understand that and you proceed with it because you can be at peace with your decision and there's clarity to what the expectations are. But I warn about this. As I said, if you're a person who is sensitive and highly emotional, you should probably not be agreeing to transactional spaces, especially if they're romantic, because chances are there's going to be a misalignment for you. It does not resonate for who you are as a person, especially if you're highly emotional and sensitive. So understanding that transactional relationships and spaces don't work for you is important about you understanding you. I think that's pretty clear. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with a transactional space or relationship if honestly they work for you. So what you should ask yourself, if you're considering a transactional space or relationship with someone, there's two things I want you to reflect on. One, are you draining yourself by trying to turn a perfectly good transactional relationship into something more than what it is? If they've told you what it is and your terms and conditions have been agreed upon, why are you draining yourself expecting more when it was clearly stated what the interaction was supposed to be? Two, how do you react when a transaction ends? Do you take things personally? Do you feel like you failed or abandoned because you couldn't get them to change their mind and fall in love with you because you felt you could? Or can you appreciate it for what it is or what it was and respect the honesty that someone gave you about what they wanted? So those are some deep dive questions to ask yourself about transactional spaces and relationships, and if they're cut out for you, especially when it comes to friendships or relationships. And even friendships can be very give or take. Do you ever feel like you got a friend that you're the one who's always making all the effort, you're always giving, and they're always taking, but you don't feel as a return in your time and energy you give into that friendship? That friendship may be far more transactional than you want to accept, because in our minds, friendships are not supposed to be transactional. So now you need to evaluate that relationship, that friendship, just a bit deeper to figure out why it's not a good fit for you. All right, let's jump into the second T, transitional spaces. So this is we're going to refer to as your seasonal bridge. And we call it that because transitions are just that. They're seasons. That wonderful cliched sayings, people come into your life for a reason or a season. And that's a hard thing sometimes to accept, especially if that person who showed up for that season or even that reason really was highly impactful for us. And I'll be honest, remember I told you some overlap? We haven't talked about transformative interactions with people, but even a transitional person could potentially end up being transformative for you and they're gone. They were meant to come in your life for a time to help you along. And now they're gone, but they did help you to bridge over something. You know, sometimes there are transitional relationships you get in. What's that other awful saying that I'm not a big fan of, because I think it could be a dangerous thing to tread upon? To get over someone, you need to get under somebody else. I always tell people I caution against that, because if you are emotionally raw, trying to put yourself into another space with somebody else when you have not healed just to get past that person is often setting yourself up for failure. But one important, who else might you be creating collateral damage with? Because you're being selfish about you're trying to get over something. So now you're dragging someone else along into a space that maybe they don't understand. So keep that in mind. So seasonal bridges, those transitional people that come into our lives. Here could be an example of a person who could be transitional for you. And I've heard people use this as an example, and they talk about this in therapy sometimes. Let's just say you have a job and you love it and you have an amazing boss. And that boss helped you grow, get better at your job. And all of a sudden that boss takes another job and they leave. Or let's say they get fired, but you had no relationship with that boss outside of work. It's just the energy, the flow was fantastic. And you feel lost because that relationship has now ended. That was a transitional person for you. And it's important to do a little deep reflection of they may be gone, but where I started versus where I am was greatly impacted by them being a part of my life for whatever reason or how long or the season that it was. Those are often referred to as contextual bonds. So when I say a contextual bond, often, like I said, it's something that exists like a boss at work. It could have been you had a great friend for 4 years in college, and then college is over, your college roommate, and you go your separate ways, and you don't mean that relationship. But those 4 years in college, you guys were great friends, and it made your college experience exceptionally well. It could be that best friend you had at a job, but they leave or you get a new job and that relationship is no longer the same. You never have people say, oh, that's my work wife, or that's my work husband, or that's my work bestie. That's a relationship that's contextual. So it's always important that you understand when people are transitional for you, where that relationship fits in your journey. And to be honest, there are a lot of transitional relationships that we have. For instance, besides maybe bosses at work, think about if you work with a personal trainer. That's usually a short amount of time you work with somebody, and they're meant to transition you in your goals. You start coming in, you have a set of goals of where you want your fitness to go. And once you achieve those goals, that relationship ends with the personal trainer. It could be the same thing with a dietitian, even your therapist. They're transitional. They get you to where you want to be. It's important to frame and understand what relationships in your life could potentially be transitional, or let's say a relationship or friendship ended and you really took it deeply. You felt like you failed at something or even was abandoned. Ask yourself, maybe that person was only meant to be there for a certain time. And am I missing the takeaway of what that relationship transformed or gave to me? So, contextual bonds, the pain of outgrowing. The hardest part of transitional spaces and relationships is they often naturally fade without anything happening to make them happen. So when that shared context might end, like a work, a fitness, person helping you, a nutritionist, your therapist, sometimes it feels awkward or sad because you've built a bond with them. So as we grow past a relationship, or our needs change, you have to learn to be okay with that pain of outgrowing different types of relationships. Have you never said to yourself, I just don't feel I have something in common with anyone anymore, or this friend group that I had, and I don't know why, because I think we're the same people. I've actually had in therapy a lot of my younger people. I love my 20-somethings that throw their fear away from therapy because they want to grow. They want to break generational curses or trauma, and they want to work on themselves to become better people. They don't want to repeat the mistakes they've seen people in their lives, like maybe family or their parents, make. So they come to therapy. And one of the biggest things they struggle with is outgrowing relationships that they thought were going to be long-term. Remember that nugget I gave you earlier is that we often think that relationships and friendships are infinite and eternal. And often many of them are not for us. And it's important to not lose sight of that. So the pain of outgrowing these transitional spaces can be hard. And lastly, learning how, when you discovered that a relationship was transitional and you are in a better place, being able to release that without resentment. Because you realized and you've done the work to realize how important that relationship was and how you've grown. But it's now, I guess you could say, its purpose has been fulfilled. So when a relationship ends, it doesn't mean you failed, nor does it mean you've been abandoned. It just means that you can love someone deep enough and care about the role they play in your life and maybe how they've written a history with you that's unique without necessarily thinking that it's always going to be a future. There are many people in your life that have been transitional and they help to shape your future, but they're not part of your present or even that future. Think about teachers you've had in life that impacted you, great bosses or employers that have helped and you've moved along. You've probably also had way more transitional relationship and stood in more transitional spaces than you've ever realized in your life because you've never defined the relationship that way. So there are two things I want you to think about and reflect on when you think about transitional spaces and relationships. Think about the last 5 years of your life, or maybe 2 or 3. You can take a year, whatever it works. Who was essential to you thriving and surviving? And are they still present with you? Also, are you holding on to something that's more of a contextual or seasonal relationship because one, You're afraid to move forward, though you may start to feel disconnected now. Maybe you hold some guilt with the idea of moving on from that space, even though the value is entirely different for you, or one better, maybe it no longer aligns for you. Those are tough questions to ask, but it will give you some deep insight to transitional spaces that you either still may be standing in, don't understand why they happened or ended the way that they did. Either way, transitionals often can be good. Now, somebody might say, can a transitional be bad? Potentially. But here's even what's interesting: if a transitional space is not good for you, it still could be the bridge over troubled water that makes you learn, that makes you grow, that forces you to move forward. So even a transactional space, that bridge may not be the most sturdy bridge you ever walked across. Seriously. But you still crossed over your troubled waters. So you can go back and maybe evaluate those interactions and spaces that got you there and have the appreciation for what they were and move forward. So yes, it is possible that a transitional space, that seasonal bridge, may not have been the best situation for you, but it served a purpose. Transitions serve a purpose, and it's paramount that you, as you do the work on you, figure out what purpose did those relationships actually serve. All right, let's get to the last and probably one of the most powerful of the T's when you talk about relationship spaces, those transformative spaces. I always say it's those destiny shifters, is how I refer to it. And I'll be honest, even these transformative ones, believe it or not, potentially could have been transactional or transitional. And you maybe won't even realize that until you do some deep reflections. They weren't here anymore, but boy, did something about you shift in a way that it made you grow, it challenged you. And that's where a lot of people struggle, is with seeing what transformation could look like. Because often it's nowhere, it doesn't look like what we often think that it would. So when we talk about destiny shifters that can step into our lives, the core concept behind this would be they're almost like seismic, like an earthquake. You feel it when they show up. That connection often, and that's why it's rare they're going to just be transactional or transitional, because they're usually so impactful, they're permanent. And these are people who stepped into your life and they changed your trajectory of where you were going. They act as a mirror. They force you into deeper self-discovery and growth. Now, somebody might say, well, Maya, can a person be the wrong kind of transformation? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not trying to do the underbelly of these three T's, but there can be even an underbelly to something being transformative if you are transforming into something that you don't want to be. So with these three T's, and we'll kind of hit this before we wrap this up, make sure they're not doing you a disservice, because they can if you're not careful. But I'm talking about, in this particular transformative space, the ones that aren't a negative space to be in. They definitely are positive and they change so much for you in a good way. So when you come across something that's transformative, I'm going to say it's a catalyst, and it can be a high friction catalyst. Transformative connections are often very rare, but they feel so comfortable. Have you ever met somebody and say, I feel like if I've known you forever, there's something about this connection that's so powerful. And by the way, when we talk about transformation, every transformation may not be epic and large. Your transformation can be small and foundational, but it's the thing that you're going to build up on. So even when you think about these words, don't think big, because we live in society where everything, the bigger it is, the better we think it is. Sometimes small can be equally as a service to you as something big. But we don't like to think that little things have as much value as we think big things do. So when something has a connection that's rare and comfortable, often the challenge feels different. And those people will challenge often why you believe something is appropriate or why you've been settling for something. They will often expose blind spots that maybe you have about yourself or other relationships. And often those things alone can trigger you to evolve. I'd like to say that Transformative relationships often exist in therapy. Now, the only reason that feels like an odd thing to say is because people often pay to be in therapy. They pay for the transformation, but that's what therapy is supposed to be, a transformative experience for you to be challenged, to grow, and to resolve things that have kept you from evolving into who you want to become. People often have a lot of misunderstandings about what they think therapy is. It isn't about being crazy. Everyone doesn't step into therapy because they're always depressed. They may feel lost, have no direction. They want some clarity in their life. They don't feel they're being the person they want to be, and they're seeking greater answers to a lot of questions that they have. Therapy is your space. It's all about you. So hence, I'm going to say that therapy is very often, it's supposed to be a transformative space for you. So outside of therapy, though, when we look at those people who can create these catalysts for us, you're looking for people that stay sometimes for a lifetime. But in some cases, they could end up leaving abruptly for reasons that are out of our control or situations that determine they can't be there. But they're somehow always available for you in some ways. So remember, even transformative people are not always going to be on speed dial for you. It might require that they have to step away, things happen, but the key thing is, for however long they stayed there with you, you can pinpoint how they shaped and help to influence your energy, your focus, and your future. Those three areas I said, when you look at that phone, those people have a high probability of totally having a large impact on your energy, for sure. How much you're putting in, how much you're getting back, where you focus your time and energy, as well as so many other things. It's so key to know that. Now, here's the thing I want to warn about transformative relationships. Don't overinvest and don't cling in ways that are not healthy, because there can be a danger that things can roll into being a little obsessive. Because there's a bond can be so intense with transformative people, it can easily become codependent or toxic if boundaries are not put in place, because that's how powerful these relationships can be. Don't believe that a person can influence you so much in such a positive way that you feel you can't exist without them or can't achieve things without their guidance, because good transformative relationships give you the tools to grow and move forward. So there's two questions I want you to think about when you are evaluating if a relationship is transformative. And I'll be honest, I kind of think you know when a relationship has been transformative for you. Who is the person who completely shifted the way you view your world? That's a very transformative person in your life. Can a transformative relationship do its job and still end, and you're still evolving and achieving the things that transformation set you upon? Because if you shut down and if you stop growing because that person's not present, that's not a good transformative relationship for you. So those are some things to truly reflect upon. So all my podcasts are always going to have takeaways for you. But before we get into that, talking about transactional spaces, transitional spaces, and transformative spaces, I said before, you still have to have caution, because with any relationship or space, there can be a negative tandem to it if you're not careful. We want to be in relationships that help us to grow. Remember, I talked about return on investment, but this is why understanding where these relationships are for you are important. Hence, like I said before, do not enter into a transactional relationship that you know is not healthy for you emotionally or mentally, financially, etc. Be mindful of transitional relationships that they don't transition you in a direction that's away from your goals. And be careful when you're transforming that you're becoming who you want to be and maybe not somebody else's vision. So even through all of these different spaces, it's deep to keep insight and to stay focused. So how can you navigate these spaces? You may ask yourself. Okay, well, there's a couple things that I want you to consider. The friction in our lives, they can come from so many different things, and they can definitely come from having the wrong people in our lives. And I'll be real honest, and sometimes we can just be in the wrong spaces. And somehow we have setbacks and we're not being the person we want to be. We're not experiencing the happiness that we thought life had in store for us. So understand where you sit with your emotion. We can get hurt when we expect transactional people to support our overall well-being, the depths of our soul. They've already told you that's not their intention. If you put that weight on a transaction, that doesn't have that value, don't be surprised when it fails you. 2, we can get heartbroken when we try to force transitional people to be in our lives forever. Remember, some people may come into your life for a reason or a season. And when someone disappears and it makes no sense, ask yourself the nature of, what is this relationship really about? And then lastly, we can miss out on our growth when we run away from discomfort. And often the thing about when people are transformative in your life, real talk, it can be comfortable, but that work that has to be done often can be uncomfortable. One of the things that I tell people when they come to therapy, we're going to have to break some eggs to make that omelet, and we're going to have to get uncomfortable to get to the comfort you're seeking. Because I'm pretty sure most of the things that we have to unpack here aren't good. So let's just be real with ourselves about what we have to execute, what we have to be willing to do, what walk we have to be willing to walk to get to where we want to be. So here's what I'll say as we wrap up this episode, which I hope has been very helpful for everybody, because I do believe that there's so much to be said about understanding where relationships belong in your life in regards to the spaces they take up, or here's one better, the spaces that you have assigned them. So now you know how you can assign relationships in your life and act accordingly. So stop grading seasonal people on a lifetime scale. Give yourself permission, and this is key, to let the spaces be exactly what they are and nothing more. And take the value that they give and stop assigning more or less. This is hard because it requires that we do, honestly, a lot of our own internal work that we're not prepared to do. And that can be the hard part, that can be very hard for us. So everyone, I hope you got some value from this particular episode. I know it wasn't an easy topic, and I hope you went, and you've got some relationships you want to do some deep diving and evaluation of. But as always, I thank you for listening to this episode. As I said, the whole purpose of my podcast is to help you to identify your ambition, harness the motivation you seek in your life, because I want you to experience happiness every day. I don't like when people make happiness a lofty and a big goal, because it can be small and very, very fulfilling. So remember, if you miss this episode or any other episodes, or if you want to go back and listen to this episode, don't fear. You can always find episodes on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audibles. Pretty much if it's a podcast platform, you're able to find me. All you have to do is search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. You can always listen to episodes of the podcast on my website, where everything M.A.Y.A is. It's maya-speaks.com. Of course, if you're a YouTuber, all you have to do is pretty much subscribe to my YouTube channel, and voila, everything is there. And I finally got my act together, everybody. I have the same social media handle, whether it's Facebook, IGX, and hey, I'm finally TikToking with everybody else. I finally got to TikTok. So now you can find me on TikTok as well. And of course, here's the thing. I'm going to tell you, to make life easy, if you just download my app, the M.A.Y.A experience, you can take me on the go, and you'll never miss an episode of M.A.Y.A and any type of resource I'm trying to put out there for you. You can find my app in the Apple Store. You can find it in Google Play, of course, the Amazon Store. You can scan these codes as well. Just search the M.A.Y.A experience, and voila, everything is right there and ready to go. It's that simple. So everybody, I appreciate you tuning in. If you found value in this, great. If you think somebody else could find some value from what I said, share the episode, get them to follow as well, because I'm all about helping people. So until next time, everyone, remember, your present becomes your past, and your future is no more. So make the most of every day. Be well, stay safe. But more importantly, I think each and every one of you that are doing the work and investing in being the person that you want to be, you deserve that level of happiness. And you're amazing for not being afraid to live your life out loud. And that takes a lot. Until next time, everybody, have a good rest of your week.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.